GT the Vibe Podcast going to another episode. I appreciate you guys rocking with me for as long as you have as we continue to push these things through, talk about our experience, talk about life, talk about relationships, talk about friendships, work, whatever it may be. That's what we talk about here at the Vibe Podcast. I'm actually starting a new series called The Spiritual Experience. So basically, what it is, what it entails is it's going to be an open conversation with people. I'm going to have people on to talk about their experiences. I'll talk about my experience. I'll talk about the experiences that I've heard of. Um, and this is really about spiritual awakening and understanding how that affects your relationship. And so, obviously, this is a spiritually led podcast, but this is also a relationship podcast. So, spiritual experience is going to put both things together, intertwine them, and we're going to try to give wisdom and impart wisdom on people. The goal is to utilize the experiences of myself and others to help people make better decisions, to help people grow spiritually, and to help people better discern um, issues that may arise in a relationship. Something that we as Christians sometimes we forget that we need to be spiritually led. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, not by the religion, not by the pastor of the church, but for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. So being led by the Spirit means that you have to be a spiritual individual. So you have to be spiritually awakened. And so we're going to talk about me becoming spiritually awakened as I stepped away from sin, as I repented and turned away from sinful action, sinful nature. Honestly, being rooted in evil when your actions are rooted in evil, and so how that affects your relationship, and then we'll talk about the other side. We're going to talk about once you grow and once you heal and once you prosper. That also affects the relationship that you're in as well. So there's so many different aspects and so many different pieces to the puzzle of relationships and spirituality for Christians that we need to have a better understanding of spiritual growth and what that entails, but also relational growth and what that entails too. And you also have to make sure that you're able to discern some of the issues that may arise. And I think that's something that is hard for people when you're in the trenches, in the battle, in the warfare, is to be able to discern some of the things that arise. And so that's the goal is for it to help people. There's people that are younger out there. I'm in my mid 30s, so I got a little bit of life experience. There are people that have more life experience than me. I always look at my mom as kind of like a pillar of an example of being spiritually led. Obviously, growing up, she was part of a family that was kind of spiritually or religiously divided when it comes to Jehovah Witnesses on one side, Christianity on the other side. And so she grew up in that type of household. And so, getting married, getting into a relationship, she ended up divorced, right? Took care of her three boys, took care of business. But one thing I always admired about my mom is that she never needed validation from the outside. She never needed attention from the outside. Like she was literally so entrenched with the Spirit of God and being led by the Spirit of God, being in relation with the Spirit of God, that was the only relationship that mattered to her. And so she lived her life in a manner that showed that that's the only relationship that mattered to her. And so it's one of those things where I got to see that, right? And I got to see how that affects, how that affected her, how that affected me and my brothers to have that example. And so they always say if you teach your kids right, they'll never depart from that truth, right? And so even my little bro going through his struggles and then going through his things and stuff like that, he was able to come back to Jesus, right? Now there are people whose parents go to church every single Sunday and their kids never go back to Jesus, right? That's because you're not the example of what God intended for your kids. You're not the example of what God intended for. If you're the example of what God intended for your kids, and you're being that example, and you're teaching them the truth. Like just teaching them religion is not teaching them the truth, and so you kind of get off into a different lane, and that lane typically leads kids away from the church. Um, and that's the crazy thing about me is even me, I've had my battles back and forth with going to church, not going to church, and all that jazz. But I always found my way back to the Lord, right? And that's the crazy thing. That's what when you think about it, it's like, man, it's because my mom put the truth in us, the actual truth, the unapologetic truth. And with that, that's what was able to help me, and it's ingrained in me. And so I will always. You may depart from it for a little bit, but you always come back to it. You're never far away, essentially. Because obviously life throws you circles and throws haymakers at you, and you're like, dude, I got to experience some other stuff. So you go out there and you experience other stuff, and then you realize that that which you are experiencing is causing turmoil inside you. And so you push and you push and you push and you continue to fight, and then eventually you end up back in Jesus holds his hand out like he did for Peter. When Peter walked off that boat and was in the water, he was drowning. All he wanted to do was say, Jesus, to just help, literally. So Jesus reached down, grabbed him out of the water. Um, and the crazy thing about that inserts that in turmoil. So some people's lives are in such turmoil, but there's people whose lives are in turmoil, but it looks like it doesn't phase them, right? Just because you're phased by what's going on, if Jesus is with you, it's easier for you to not be phased by what's going on. And so that's the type of stuff that we're going to talk about in the podcast. We're going to talk about over the next couple months. I'm gonna keep this thing rolling. So today, really, I just want to start with some basic stuff, man. About me. I was there was a time frame, a couple year time frame where I was basically doing the works of Satan, man. Like honestly, just evil after evil after evil, ill after ill, right? And I'm not afraid to put my stuff out there. I'm not afraid to be honest with myself, you know, and the things that I've done. And so it's easy for me to put it out there because at the end of the day, there's no shame, right? There's only shame in things that you hide, right? If you're hiding stuff, then there's shame, right? If you're a person that's super and heavily rooted in shame, it's probably because you're hiding stuff, right? So what happens is people will put things in it. There's a closet back here. So say this closet is overfilled with clothes, right? There's so many clothes in there, and you're just like shoving them in, and you're shoving them in, and you're shoving them in, and you continue to shove them in, right? And the door is just closed, and if you open the door, everything's gonna pile out, right? So what happens is you're yourself. You meet somebody that's healed or somebody that's in the process of healing, and they touch the doorknob of the closet that you've hidden so much stuff in, right? There's so much shame back there that when they touch it, it's an immediate reaction. Oh man, you can't touch that because if you touch it and you open it up, the truth comes out, right? And most people don't want to see themselves truthfully. They want to see themselves as whatever perception that they feel like the world needs to see. And so what happened with me was I felt like I had so much stuff stuffed in this closet that if anybody touched the closet, I was like, we was about to box. We was about to go to blows. And so what I learned is that people that are like this because they're ashamed. And so I was ashamed of everything that I had in the closet, right? And the crazy thing about God is he was exposing me one piece at a time. He knew I couldn't handle full exposure because if he fully exposed me, who knows what would happen. So one piece at a time, expose over time. And so eventually he was able to he opened my closet and got my closet door open. And then I was able to look at myself in the mirror and say, okay, dude, either you're going to get delivered from the things that you're doing or you're going to keep walking that path and eventually lose it all, right? Eventually lose it all. Not only lose it all here on earth, but lose it all because God holds our salvation in hand. And so he opened the closet and he kind of started to work his way through and started to pull things out. And as I'm looking at the things that he's pulling out of the closet, I'm just like, dude, like it's literally waking me up in spirit because during that time frame, you know, whenever you're deceiving people, you're lying to people. There in that time frame, there's such turmoil inside you because if you're a Christian and you're a true Christian, you know the difference between right and wrong. Well, actually, everybody does because when Adam and Eve ate the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they got the knowledge of right and wrong, good and evil. So we know what's right and what's wrong, right? But the difference is when you walk with Christ, when you walk with Jesus and you're spiritually led, you can admit to wrong. If you're not spiritually led, you will justify wrong. So there are people that will justify lies or justify deceiving, and people that do that, it's because they're spiritually immature, but they're also not spiritually led. Something else is leading them, right? Because in God is truth, and the truth is there is a right and there is a wrong, and if you can't admit to, you know, if you try to put yourself in a gray area, which is where I was in a gray area, I was in the middle, and so I got to a point where I was justifying the wrongs that I was doing, right? And so when you justify the wrongs, it's because you're being led by something else. You're not being led by the Spirit. A spiritually led person will never justify sin. Never justify sin. So if you're in a relationship with somebody and they're justifying the bad things that they're doing, and I mean, obviously pray for them, but you have to be honest. That person is not being spiritually led. There's no justification for wrong, right? There is right and there is wrong, and there's a black line between the two. And what happens is the line gets clouded. The further away from God that you get, the line gets so much more clouded. And then eventually there is no line. You get so far away from God, there's no line, but it's no holds barred, Midwest, like Wild Wild West type of stuff. And so that's what happened. And so God had to wake me up. And when he woke me up, I started to see differently. I started to operate differently. I was a better friend. Like you become better. You become a better partner. You become a better father. You become a better mother. You become a you become a better child to your parents. You become a better sibling to your brothers. You start to be there for people. You start to pray for people, and that's one thing that helped me really big is like be is praying more, spending more time in the Word. Like the more time I spent in the Word, the more I was able to see, and the better that I'm able to see, because I think most our problem in Christianity and even in relationships is that we don't understand who the enemy is. If you don't know who your enemy is, bro, your enemy could be standing inside the relationship with you, and you don't even know it. You over here battling with your partner when really it's the enemy that's causing the battle, right? And so if you don't know your enemy, you could be literally hand in hand with your enemy. Your hand could be literally destroying your relationship because you're hand in hand with the enemy. And so that's where it was. Is I was hand in hand with the enemy, just destroying the relationship that I had. So I had to wake up. It literally took rock bottom to wake up. And so as I woke up, as I become more spiritually led, as I started to look at life differently, started to look at myself honestly, that's when change started, right? It takes all these pieces for an individual to change. And so what I realize is this: I have an understanding of what it's like to be on the other side. So I know what that's about, man. I know what it's like to justify your sin. I know what it's like to sit around and think that all everything wrong has happened to you. But one thing that I never did in those situations is make myself a victim. I was never a victim, right? If you're doing wrong and you're treating somebody wrong, you're not a victim, right? You're a perpetrator. And so what happens is you get in relationships with individuals who are perpetual victims or a victim of everything. Victims will never be accountable. If they're consistently a victim of every single thing, they'll never be able to hold themselves accountable to anything because it's always going to be somebody else's fault. And so what you realize is if it's always if, and a victim has to have an oppressor. A victim has to have somebody that's causing them the problem or that's pushing them in a way that they don't want to be pushed, right? So if there's a victim, if your partner is a victim or if you're a victim, if you yourself are being the victim in your relationship, you're painting your partner as an oppressor, as a villain, because a victim needs a villain. In every single story, a victim and a villain, you got to have a villain. And so what happens is you will protect the mask, the image of being a victim with everything that you have. And so what happens is if you are a victim in a relationship all the time, you are going to do and say things that probably aren't right. You will bend the truth to hold on to the victim card, right? Because if you hand up that victim card, now you got to look at yourself in the mirror. And that, my friend, is the most fearful thing for certain people. For there's a conglomerate of people out there that absolutely can't look at themselves in the mirror. They can't fathom being wrong, right? Or being wrong, or if you tell them that they're wrong, it's an attack on them personally when it's really not an attack. It's a warning. Like you got to stop doing wrong, right? And so when you have to deal with that type of relationship, it's stressful for you because now you got to like tiptoe around the category of things, and you shouldn't have to tiptoe. Number one, so in a relationship, you should never have to tiptoe around a category of anything. And number two, you should be able to bring a grievance up to your partner and say, "Hey, this is a problem," and they should be able to take it. You know, a healthy person takes it. It says, "Okay, okay. I have to fix this. There's some things I got to do. I got to work on myself." Somebody who is not a healed person may be having some underlying issues. I don't use the therapist terms and all that stuff that's out there. They be talking about. I do believe in that. I do believe that there is a Jezebel spirit, a controlling spirit that can be in men and women. I do believe that. I believe that there's a prideful spirit. It can be in men and women. I believe there's a spirit of arrogance, where because I believe that the Bible literally tells us that your battles are not in the flesh; they're in the spirit. They're spiritual. It's in the spiritual realm. And so, if you're spiritually immature, you may not even know that there's a battle going on in you because you're spiritually immature. And so what happens is you get a person that is a perpetual victim. They'll blame you for everything. Have any of you guys ever been in a relationship where you've been blamed for everything is your fault? Every like if your partner makes an action and their action is wrong, it's your fault that they did that. People like this are the perpetual victim category, and you typically have a lot of shame, a lot of things like internally that they have not dealt with, and so it's basically an unhealed individual that's masking, right? They're masking their problems underneath the caveat of being a victim, and typically these people also will portray themselves as loving and caring outside, and so when they're outside, they're perfect. These are the type of people that will jump through hoops for a stranger, but when you ask them to do something at home, they don't want to do it. It's like asking them to it's literally like you're asking them to rob a bank when you're just asking for a small thing at home. And so all these things intertwine into a person that is unhealed, somebody that is unhealed. There's some trauma that they did not heal from. And so what happens is they develop a defense mechanism. And their defense mechanism is I got to be a victim, but I got to be a perfect person out here. And so what they'll do is when they tell stories about what happens inside the home, it'll be bended truth. They won't tell the whole truth because if they tell the whole truth, they gotta talk about themselves, and they can't fathom in their mind being a bad person. They can't fathom that. It's like, dude, I cannot be a bad person. Like you'll tell them something, and it'll be like mind blowing for them. Like, dude, I can't do like I can't see myself in that light. And if you're dealing with that and you can't see yourself in the light, then you yourself, if you're a Christian, need to pray. Pray all the time, get closer to Jesus. Because a spirit led person won't do that. That's not something that's normal for somebody that's being led by the Spirit of God, because God is truth. So if you're being led by the Spirit of God, you won't hide from the truth, right? You'll never hide from the truth. And one thing I was talking about the other day, I was like, dude, everything good that happens in your life didn't come from God. Everything good in your life did not come from God. God would not put something in your life that would lead you away from Him. So if what you're doing is good for you, but it leads you away from God, you can't say God put that there. God's not going to do that. And that's like again, that's a spiritually immature person. Because in order for you to have a relationship with God, God is you being led by the Spirit, so you have to be spiritual to have a relationship with Him. And I think that Christians, when we get in relationships with people, we don't you listen to what people say, you also watch what they do. Because people will say things to you and they won't make sense, right? And so people are telling you stuff, and I mean, even me, I probably said some things where it was just like, dude, that didn't make no damn sense. Why you say that? And I didn't notice that I was saying things that didn't make sense, that didn't line up, right? And so typically, another thing to look out for, and I'm just kind of giving you guys tips this episode, is an individual that can't be themselves in every room that they walk in. If the person has to shape shift and be different here and different here, conforming to the different crowds, they don't have an identity. A person that has an identity is going to be consistent everywhere they go. If a person doesn't have an identity, then their identity comes from the people that they're around. And so they'll get in a group of people that may like rock and roll music, and they'll just like rock and roll music all of a sudden. Then they'll change groups. Now they'll be in a group of people like country music, and all of a sudden they're like country music all the time, right? So you have to watch for the cues, sudden changes. Typically, as a person that doesn't have an identity, they're easily, um, what is the word that I'm looking for, man? I'm over here like, what is the word? I can't even think of the word, guys. Can't y'all probably know it in the podcast? I can tell you. I've put it down at the bottom. But it's people that literally will conform or change up. Easily influenced. That's what it is. Easily influenced. These people are easily influenced. Like easily influenced to anything, right? They This because they don't have an identity. If you have an identity, you're not easily influenced because you will always revert back to what your identity is, right? So if your identity is XYZ and then somebody tries to hit you with ABC, you're gonna be like, no, 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 because my identity is XYZ, so I can't do ABC, right? So a person that doesn't have an identity will do ABC, and then the next person will be like, well, you got to do EFG, and then they're like, well, dang, I got to switch over here. I got to do EFG. So you have to watch for these things. And there are a lot of cues that happen throughout the earlier parts of the talking stages of relationship, even when you first get into a relationship. But sometimes we get so grounded and rooted in love because you love these individuals. Like we love these individuals. These individuals love you too. But the problem is, it's an unhealthy and toxic level of love. So it's one of those things where a person will do certain things inside the household, but they don't want you to tell nobody outside. Don't tell nobody out here that this is happening, X, Y, Z. Or if you tell them that you told somebody out there, they're gonna get pissed at you. Um, and so it's because they don't want the perception that they've created, because people will literally craft a perception of themselves that isn't true, and so they'll get so intertwined and so just influenced by their own perception that it's like they gaslight themselves. It's like they're telling themselves, "Oh, I'm this and I'm that," but they're really not this and that. They're really the other. And so you have to. Those are some things that you have to watch out for when you're, especially when you're in a relationship. Like I said, listen to what people say and watch what they do. That'll tell the story. And then also watch their actions. Can they do they have conflict resolution? Conflict resolution is a sign of maturity. Can you resolve conflict without getting blown up, getting rash, storming out, like all the little are gossiping all the time about it? Because people will feel like people who lack conflict resolution, um, they will never solve anything. Like nothing will ever be solved. It just disappears. If you're in a relationship and you feel like, man, I brought up a grievance, or I brought this thing up, or this thing was brought up, and man, it just disappeared. Like just never, nothing ever really came of it. That person, literally, that's the game. That's the mindset. They'll silent treat you, give you silent treatment to where you forget about the grievance that you had, and it just never gets brought up again. And so nothing ever gets fixed. So when you're in a relationship with people like this, nothing ever really gets fixed. It's always an open case. Me and my prior law enforcement, it's always an open case. Case never gets closed. It's always open. And so these are things that you have to watch out for. And but you have to pray, and you have to be able to spiritually discern that these are issues in a relationship. But it's episode one. I appreciate you guys. I will have a couple of my buddies on to talk about some of the things that they've gone through, some tough breakups, some domestic abuse, mental abuse, things like that. So that the goal for us is to really impart wisdom on the people that are out there, so that way you guys can see it, react to it, and make the right decision from it. That's the goal, and that's the end all be all for us. It's GT Divide Podcast. I appreciate you. Episode one down. We're out.